Okay, so this unit we are going to be beginning to talk about factoring. These set of notes today are very important that you understand because if you don't understand today, you won't understand anything else in this unit. So please make sure when you leave today that you understand everything from these notes. So last unit we talked about how to multiply polynomials. So if you look at this example right here, if I was given you 3x times x plus 4, we in this last unit would have distributed that to get 3x squared plus 12x. Well, what we're going to be doing in this unit is we're going to be going backwards. So we're going to be taking that 3x squared plus 12x and we're going to be getting that to 3x times x plus 4. So in factoring, what you are doing is you are figuring out what 2 or 3 or 4 things are being multiplied together to get that. Okay, another example down here, if I was given x squared minus 6, or minus x minus 6, I'm going to be factoring that to figure out what was being multiplied to get to x squared minus x minus 6, and it was x plus 2 and x minus 3. We'll be going through the process of how to do that. Okay, what we first need to talk about is the greatest common factor. Okay, you'll hear me call that the GCF. Y'all heard that before. Okay, we're going to be looking at these 6 problems, and we're going to be looking first at the coefficients and then at the variables to decide if there's any GCFs with the variables. Okay, and when we do this, we're going to take the GCF out, and then we're going to write what would be remaining if we were to divide that out. Okay, so here we go. Number 1. First, I'm going to look at the 7 and the 49. Okay, and I want to think of all the factors of 7 and 49. Okay, the greatest factor that goes into both of those numbers is 7. Okay, then I want to look at the variables. Well, there's no variables that they have in common. Okay, so now I'm going to write what's left. So what I'm doing here is I'm dividing each one of these terms by 7. And if I do that, 7x divided by 7, I'm left with x, plus 49 divided by 7 is 7. If you wanted to check this, you could. Take that 7 and distribute it, and it should be 7x plus 49. Okay, number 2. Okay, they don't really have a coefficient in common besides 1. I don't need to take that out. So now I'm going to look at the variables. Now this first one has 2 x's. The second one, 5x, has that 1x. And I want to see how much they have in common. They have 1x in common. So I'm going to take an x out. If I divide an x out of both of these terms, I'm going to be left with x plus 5. Okay, number 3, I'm going to look at the coefficients first. Okay, so the GCF between 2 and 6, that's going to be 2. And then I'm going to look at the variables. I can also take out, they both have a y in common, so I'm going to take a y out. Okay, if I divide this all by 2y, now this is tricky right here. Even though 2y and 2y, that cancels out to 1. Okay, so I have to write that 1. I can't just leave it empty. If I started out with 2 things, I need to remain with 2 things. So I have 1 plus 6 divided by 2 is 3. Those y's cancel out, but I am left with an x. Okay, number 4. Okay, I look at the coefficients, 2, 4, and 8. My GCF there is going to be 2. Okay, I also want to see if there's any variables they all have in common. They all have to have it to be able to take it out, and they don't. Okay, 2 of them have x's, but the other don't. Okay, so I'm going to just take out a 2, and when I do that, I'm going to be left with x squared plus 2x plus 4. Okay, number 5, I'm going to look at my coefficients. Looks like I can take a 3 out of all that. And they don't all have the same variable. So I'm just going to divide this all by 3. And that leaves me with x squared plus 2x minus 8. And number 6, looks like I can take a 4 out of everything. They also all have an x. Okay, but that's the most they have in common. They don't all have an x squared, but they all have an x. Okay, so I'm going to divide this all by 4x and see what we have left. So from this first term, I'm going to be left with x squared. The second term, I'm going to be left with 3x. And this last term is going to be minus 6. Okay, we're going to skip these that y'all would do on your own. So we're going to skip that. Okay, we're going to get a little bit more complicated here. And we're just going to keep breaking this apart like we did before. We're going to look at the coefficients, then we're going to look at the x, then we're going to look at the y. So let's first look at the coefficients, 6, 30, and negative 30. I'm going to be able to take a 6 out. Now let's look at the x's. I have an x to the fourth, an x cubed, and an x squared. They all at least have an x squared, so I can bring that out. And then now I'm going to look at the y's, and they all have at least a y squared. Okay, now we're going to divide all of that by 6x squared, y squared, and we're going to write what's left. So from this first term, I took 2 of the 4 x's out, so I'm still left with 2 x's. Those y's canceled out. Plus 30 divided by 6 is 5. I took 2 of the 3 x's out, so I'm still left with 1. Those y's canceled out. Minus 30 divided by 6 is 5. Those x squareds canceled out, and the y squareds canceled out, so that's what's remaining. Okay, on this second one, I'm going to look at my coefficients. Make sure you get the greatest common factor. I don't want to choose 2 here because there's something bigger than 2. So 4 goes into all of these. They all have an x cubed, so I can bring that out. And they all have at least one y. I'm going to divide this all by 4x cubed y. And that's going to leave me with 5. Those x cubes are going to cancel out. I'm still going to have 2 of those y's left. Minus 8. Those x's cancel out again. I'm still left with the y. Plus 24 divided by 4 is 6. Those x's cancel out. The y's cancel out. Okay, now we're going to get into the main factoring stuff that we're going to be looking at this unit. This is the stuff that, as long as you can get the process down, it is not difficult, but you do have to get that process down. All right, so here we go. Now, I know it says step 1 says find A, B, and C. I'm going to add a step before that because we need to find our GCF first. So I want you to write that down. The first thing that we actually need to do is find the GCF on all of these. You might not always have one, but you might sometimes. You have to make sure you take that out. So let's look at this. I have x squared plus 7x plus 12. I do not have a GCF. Okay, the next thing is find A, B, and C. Okay, your A is going to be in front of the x squared, okay, which in this case, that would just be 1. Your B is going to be in front of x, so that would be 7. And your C is the constant. That's the number by itself, not connected to a variable, so that's going to be 12. Okay, the next step is we have to find some specific factors. Those specific factors have to multiply to be A times C. Okay, so I'll show you all the process of what I want y'all to do every single time. Okay, we're going to do a little multiply sign there. We're going to do an x for multiply. And if I do A times C, that's 1 times 12. So I need these to multiply to be 12. And they also have to add to give us the B. And the B in this situation is 7. So we need to find factors of 12 that multiply to be 12. They have to add to be 7. Okay? Now some of you maybe already know what those factors are, and that's great. Okay, but some of us may need to make some type of table to figure out certain factors. Okay, so I'm going to put in this little table of 12. And let's think of all the factors of 12, and I'm just going to start at 1. Okay, so I know 1 times 12 is 12. 2 times 6 is 12. 3 times 4 is 12. And again, you may not have to do this every time, but if you get stuck trying to find the factors, then you need to start making a table. Okay, so remember, we needed these to add to be 7. Okay, well, there they are, 3 and 4. Okay, now here's where you have to hang with me right here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to break apart this middle term of 7x. Okay, we're trying to figure out how is that 7x formed. It was formed from a positive 3x and a positive 4x. Does not matter what order you put those in, but let's just all put them in the same order, that way it's the same. So 3x plus 4x. And then what you're going to do, you're going to bring down that x squared, and you're going to bring down the 12. So notice, all we have done here is taken apart that middle term. Everything else stayed the same. Okay, now the process that we are going to solve these factoring problems is called grouping. Okay, the reason it's called grouping is because we are about to group these together. So we're going to group these first two terms together, then we're going to group the next two terms together. Okay, and now we're going to go back to what we talked about with the GCF. Okay, so let's look at this first group, x squared plus 3x. I want to look at that and say, what is the GCF of x squared and 3x? Okay, and I notice that they both have an x in common. Okay, if they have a coefficient in common, you can take that out. But in this case, they both just have an x in common. Okay, we're not going to use this little area right here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that x out, and I'm going to write what would be left, just like we did on the GCF problems before. So if I take an x out, I'm left with x plus 3. Okay, I'm going to bring this minus sign down. Or sorry, it's not a minus, it's a plus. Plus sign down. Now I'm going to look at the second group, and I have to decide what does that second group have in common. I have 4x plus 12, and I can factor out a 4 from both of those. Okay, so I have plus 4. If I divide that out, I'd be left with x plus 3. Okay, notice that our two groups, this group and this group, notice those are exactly the same. If those are not the same, then you have done something wrong. Okay, so here's what we do now. Here's how we write our final answer. Okay, these two groups are the same, so I'm going to write that down once. So I have x plus 3. Okay, I've just written that down. Okay, and you don't always have to cross these out. I'm just crossing these out so you can see what is left now. Now if I read this from left to right, let's see what we have left still. I have x plus 4. So x plus 4. And that's our answer. So what we've just done is we figured out what was multiplied together to get x squared plus 7x plus 12. If I were to FOIL x plus 3 and x plus 4, it would get me right back to that. Okay, if you didn't completely understand this first example, hopefully you'll get it on the second example. All right, let's look at this one. So we have x squared minus 2x minus 8. Remember that first step is to find the GCF. Okay, now look at this, and it doesn't look like there is one. So the next thing I'm going to do is find my a, b, and c. So my a here is 1. My b here is negative 2. And my c here is negative 8. Okay, and here's where it gets a little bit trickier because we're dealing with negatives. All right, so we're going to have to find some factors. Remember, they have to multiply to be a times c. So multiply in this case to be negative 8. And they're going to have to add to be our b, which is negative 2. Okay, so you have to think a little harder about this, because to be able to multiply to get a negative number, that means I have to have one positive number and one negative number. Okay, so let's think about the factors of 8, or negative 8. So I could have 1 times negative 8. I could have 2 times negative 4. And it looks like right there, that is our winner. If for some reason those two added up to be 2 instead of negative 2, just flip the negative to the other number, and then it'll add to get you that negative 2 or whatever we're trying to get. Okay, so here we go. We found our factors. That's half the battle right there, is finding the factors. Next thing we're going to do is break this middle term apart. Okay, my two factors are 2 and negative 4, so that's going to be a positive 2x and a minus 4x. Then remember, we're going to bring that first term down, and I'm going to bring the last term down. Okay, the process that we use for factoring is called grouping. So we are going to group this first two terms together, then we're going to group the second two terms together. Okay, let's look at the first group. Okay, I want to see what these two terms have in common. They both have an x in common. So I'm going to bring that x out. If I divide that x out, I'm left with x plus 2. Bring this minus sign down. Now I'm going to look at the second group. Okay, the second group I can take out of 4. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. Notice that since we brought this negative down, I'm really dividing out a negative 4. Not a positive 4, but a negative 4. So really I have negative 4x divided by negative 4. So that leaves me with x. I have negative 8 divided by negative 4. That leaves me with positive 2. Okay, remember that these two groups had to be the same. So if you're unsure on what that other sign right here needed to be, you know it needs to be plus because that's what the first group says. Okay, so these are the same in the groups. So I'm going to write that down once. X plus 2, and then I'm left with x minus 4. And there is our two factors. That is what was multiplied together to get that. All right, here we go, moving on. Okay, we're going to do one of these together. Let's do number 5. All right, so here we go. First step, GCF. There's not a GCF. The next step is multiply your A and C. You don't have to write out A equals B equals and C equals every time. I'll show you what I like to do. I just like to do this. That way I don't forget to do A times C. Okay, we've just been dealing with ones as our A, but sometimes we will have a number there. All right, so I have A times C, that's 1 times 24. So I need two factors that multiply to be 24, and they have to add up to be B, which is negative 10. All right, so let's think about this. To multiply to get a positive number, that means it either has to be two positives or it has to be two negatives. But in this case, I need to add to get a negative number, which means we need to find two factors that are negative. Okay, so let's think. I'm just going to make a little table here. Everything that multiplies to be 24. Remember, they both have to be negative. So I've got negative 1 and negative 24. Those don't add to be negative 10. Negative 2 and negative 12. Those don't add to be 10. Negative 3 and negative 8. Those don't add to be negative 10. Negative 4 and negative 6. There we go. There's our winners. All right, so now we're going to break apart this middle term. We're going to have a minus 4x and a minus 6x. I'm going to bring down this first term of x squared, and I'm going to bring this last term down to 24. Remember, this process is called grouping. So we're going to group together the first two terms, group together the last two terms. And let's look at that first group. So the first group, it looks like I can take out an x. So I'm going to take that x out, and I'll be left with x minus 4. Okay, I'm going to bring this minus sign down. Now I'm going to look at the second group. Looks like I can take out a 6. Okay, but remember, because we brought this minus sign down, we're really taking out a negative 6. Okay, so that's going to leave me with x minus 4. Okay, so when I write these answers down, remember these are the same. So I'm going to write that down once, x minus 4, and then I'm going to write down what's left, which would be x minus 6. And there we go. There's our factors. Okay, we're going to skip these. And let's go here. Okay, so remember, our first step is not to find A, B, and C. Our first step is to look for a GCF. Okay, and in this instance, we do have one. They all have a 3 that I can take out. So I'm going to take that 3 out first. If I divide a 3 out, I'm left with x squared minus x minus 2. Okay, but we're not done. We have to actually factor this trinomial that we have left. Okay, so now I'm going to multiply my a and c. So I need two factors that multiply to be -2 and add to be -1. All right, there's not that many factors of -2, so you can probably figure it out. It's going to be -2 and +1. Those are going to be our winners. All right, so we're going to break this negative x apart into a -2x, a plus x. I'm going to bring that x squared down, and I'm going to bring the -2 down. Now we're going to group. Okay, looking at the first group, looks like I can take an x out. I'm going to take that x out. That's going to leave me with x minus 2. Bring that plus sign down. Okay, now this second group, I don't see anything that they have in common. Okay, but remember, everything has a 1 in common at least. So I'm just going to take out a +1, which you do have to write down. And if I divide all that by +1, it's going to stay the same. So x minus 2. Okay, notice our two groups are the same. So we're going to write that down once. Okay, and then I'm left with x plus 1. Okay, remember that 3 that we factored out earlier? We have to throw that back out front because that was also used to multiply to get 3x squared minus 3x minus 6. Okay, we are going to skip this. And because I want y'all to have enough time to work, we're going to go ahead and skip this. And this. And let's do one of these. All right, let's do number 1 here. We won't do number 2. Okay, because here we do not have a GCF, but we do have a number in front of x squared. That's okay. Okay, so there's no GCF, so I'm going to multiply my a and c. I need two factors that are going to multiply to be 3 times 2, which would be 6. And they have to add to be my b, which is -5. They have to do both of those things. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and say the two factors are going to be 1 and -6. Again, you can put those in any order. It does not matter. Okay, so I'm going to break this apart into a +x and a -6x. I'm going to bring that first term down of 3x squared, and I'm going to bring that last term down of +2. We're going to group the first two terms together, group the last two terms together. Okay, the first group, I can take out an x. So take that x out, and I'm left with 3x plus. X divided by x is going to be 1. You have to put something there. Bring that minus sign down. And now with this second group, I can take out a 2. Oh, this is the wrong, sorry. I picked the wrong factors from the very beginning. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, never mind. We're going to skip this one. Those wouldn't have been the factors. It would have been -2 and -3. Sorry, that's my bad. Okay, well, you would work this out the same exact way that we would work the other problems, even though there is a number in front of x squared. Sorry. Okay, we're going to skip this. We're going to skip this. And let's go to this last slide. All right, here we go. Now, notice on these, we're factoring a trinomial with not just one variable, but 2 variables. Okay, and we are actually going to work this the same exact way that we've worked all the other ones. Okay, we're just going to work B here, or we're going to work A. Okay, so here we go. Do we have a GCF? No, they don't all have anything in common. The next thing I'm going to do is multiply A and C. So I need two factors that multiply to be a -60, and they have to add to be 17. Okay, it may take you a little while to find these factors, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that they are 20 and negative 3. Those multiply to be negative 60, and they add to be 17. Okay, so I'm going to break this middle term apart, but notice this isn't just 17x, it's 17xy. So that was made from a positive 20xy and a minus 3xy. Bring that first term down, bring the last term down, and now we group. Just going to have a little bit more to factor out on these. Okay, so let's look at this first group. It looks like they both have an x in common. So I'm going to take that x out. That leaves me with x plus 20y. Bring that minus sign down. Okay, here I can factor out a 3 and a y. So that's minus 3y. Notice since we brought this minus sign down, that's actually a negative 3y that we're dividing out. So that leaves me with x plus negative 60 divided by negative 3 is 20. And I'm also left with a y. Okay, notice here that our two groups, guess what? They're the same, again. Okay, same thing goes on these. These have to be the same. Okay, so I'm going to write that down once. X plus 20y. And then what are we left with? X minus 3y. Okay, and there we go. So for the homework, please make sure that you're doing every single step on the homework. I am going to leave a note for the sub, but what I do want y'all to do on here, on this homework, I want you to mark out numbers 14 through 19. So you're going to mark out number 14 through 19 on your homework. Everything else you're going to do. So that is basically 13 plus on that last page is how many questions? 5 questions on the last page. So that's 18 problems that you're going to have to do. Please, please make sure that you understand this. It's very important that you understand all of this.